Well, Italy took a huge number of migrants. We have, unfortunately, a large number of illegal migrants coming to Sicily and then moving north to the other regions of Italy. We are bearing the burden of people that violate international and European law.
I don't understand what you mean when you say you're bearing the burden. As I say, the figures show that Italy's refugee population is much, much smaller than many of the European countries.
Well, but the territory, the density of the population in Italy is much higher, and so we want to respect European legislation. European legislation is very clear. What we can accept is to have a regular migrant flows management. This is what we want, and this is what we accept.
I'm sorry, look, I just want to be very clear on this, if I could push you on this. I mean, Italy is one of the 4 biggest countries in Europe. It has 6 times the population of Sweden, and yet Sweden still has more migrants. So I'm not quite sure how you're working your calculations as to density and bearing the burden of immigration, as you were putting it.
Well, on the basis of all the public figures we have, but one simple fact is very clear. Italy is by far the country that has been saving lives and rescuing the hugest number of migrants in need on Mediterranean. We saved thousands and thousands of human lives, and we are very proud of it.
You say that you will agree with and enforce all the EU sanctions announced. Let me just ask you what you're doing in terms of investments, in terms of assets related to Libya. Your relationship business-wise and financially with Libya much closer than any other European nation. The deal that was struck with Libya just a few years ago in 2008 provided for $5 billion in investments into Libya over 20 years. Is that part of the deal also going to be suspended? Are you going to ask for that money back? How are you going to manage this need for a freeze on assets of the regime?
Well, we are absolutely ready. I said already that Italy will support all the sanctions that will be decided on the economic field, on financial field from UN and from the European Union. We are discussing now what kind of sanctions, but all kind of sanctions will be agreed by Italy.
But have you frozen all the assets that you know are related to Libya?
There are. I don't know in details what kind of assets, but whatever it will be, Italy will agree and will implement in full the sanctions.
Italy has been historically very close to Libya, as we know, and your current Prime Minister, Mr. Berlusconi, has been very close to Mr. Gaddafi, as we know. Are you willing and able to do what the UK has done and remove his diplomatic immunity?
We can discuss together, because this is an initiative that should be taken at European level. We have no problems at all, because since we adopted a travel ban, we have no problems of Libyan regime people entering the Italian territory. So we have no need to remove what it doesn't longer exist, that is diplomatic immunity, since they cannot simply enter the Italian territory.
Well, I'm just wondering whether, because of the relationship between the two countries, Italy might consider or entertain the idea of providing Mr. Gaddafi with some kind of refuge.
No, we don't take even into consideration the idea. It is excluded.
All right. You talk about trying to build democracy, and we've heard lots of fine words from the UN members gathered there and supporting the democracy. And as we've pointed out, it's a little bit too late, but nonetheless probably welcome to a lot of people in Libya. My question is, how are you going to do that? What can you in Italy do to make sure that the next generation of Libyan leaders is not as bad as this one?
Well, first of all, we want to reach out to the opponents of the current regime. We have a good knowledge of people living outside of Libya that are resisting to the regime, that have been resisting. We could offer some good opportunities like students' exchanges, I would say scholarships. We can help, but in full respect of the ownership. It will be the Libyan people who will decide about its destiny.
And the sanctions that we have seen already, as announced by the EU and by the United Nations, do you think they go far enough? I mean, you have mentioned recently the possibility of no-fly zones. You have mentioned using your military bases in some context. Give us a little bit more detail as to how much more do you think is going to be necessary to get Gaddafi out?
It depends on what the international community will be discussing, because we have been discussing about the so-called no-fly zone. To have a no-fly zone which would be an extremely useful instrument to prevent the regime from bombarding, from using helicopters and planes, this is a measure that we could adopt provided that we are absolutely sure the international community is ready to enforce. In my talks with France, with UK, with Germany, with United States, I understood at this stage discussions are not ready for adopting a measure like no-fly zone, while it's necessary to continue to explore all the legal and practical consequences. I've already said Italy would have military bases, but what about the rest? The practical enforcement.
And that's effectively what I'm trying to ask you with respect, because what we have had so far all along the line have been, I guess, a lot of evasions leading to mild condemnation, leading to the understanding that something needs to be done, leading to big condemnation, leading to sanctions, if I can characterize the past 10 days or so in that manner. And yet what we haven't seen is anything really practical that will give us an idea of what the future is going to look like and give us an idea of exactly what role you can play in making sure that this situation doesn't occur again, that we don't see Africa, the North African states that are in trouble, relapsing into a situation where you have human rights regimes that don't respect their citizens being supported by Westerners.
Well, I think what is necessary, I said, is necessary for Mediterranean region. We should launch as soon as possible a new pact for stability, prosperity and democracy of European and non-European Mediterranean states working together. What we talk about is a Marshall Plan for economic development, helping promoting democracy and human rights. And of course, for the moment, what is necessary is the full implementation of international sanctions. We just adopted UN sanctions. We are about to adopt European sanctions, and all the European member states should fully implement.
You talk about a Marshall Plan, and that's come also from a number of other European politicians as well. But the Marshall Plan, as we know, was a government-led plan. It was public money being